So I have a bit of a confession to make. I was actually planning not to do a book review this week and instead do a video ranking all the Stephen King books that I've read. But then I started reading Me and Earl and the Dying Girl and I finished in about 2 days. Now first off, I picked up this book because I heard a lot of comparisons between it and The Perks of Being a Wallflower, which is one of my personal all-time favorite books. So going in, I was really excited to see how it would measure up. I was ready to get invested in the story, the characters, and was holding on to hope that the book really would be worthy of the comparisons to The Perks of Being a Wallflower that I had heard. So did it live up to those high expectations? Well, not really. It's not all bad, but it's definitely not all good either. The plot is pretty straightforward. A high school girl comes down with leukemia, and one of her classmates is forced by his mother to be friends with her as she goes through treatment. When the book was good, it was really good. But when I felt the book was dragging its feet, I really felt it. For me, the book's major problem is one I'm going to keep referencing throughout this review, and that's that I didn't like the narrator, like at all. The book came across as feeling very detached, and that's because the narrator, Greg Gaines, a high school filmmaker, was also pretty detached. I get that the book is going for realism. It's really trying to show how a normal kid would react to their classmate getting cancer, but it needed a bit more for me to be able to get into the story. Greg was flawed, but he was almost too flawed. It was to the point of unlikability, and I honestly feel like he might be one of my most disliked narrators of all time. He kept making the story about himself, and yeah, that's how a kid his age might act, but it didn't make me want to get invested in him. Anyway, let's move on to the actual review. As I do in my other videos, I'm going to break my thoughts down into 3 sections: plot, characters, and pacing, and at the end, I'll be giving the story a grade. Oh, and there will be no spoilers here. So for plot, the first thing that surprised me about this book is that the dying girl side of it all is actually kind of a B story. The book is much more focused on Greg and his narration, and right away we get a feel for the sort of person he is. He explains that he's a very specific way of going about high school. He's acquainted, but not friends, with everyone. He clearly is doing it to protect himself, but as a result of how closed off he is, he's very detached. In fact, as we get more from his perspective, he comes across as a very superficial and shallow person. With very few exceptions, he's entirely apathetic to the world. I found the way Greg looked at the world to be very sad. He came across as unhappy and lonely, and the only thing he seems to care about are the movies he makes with his friend Earl, who he doesn't even call a friend but a coworker. Sure, his way of going through high school without ruffling any feathers works, but at the same time it leaves him as a very empty person. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. So Rachel is the dying girl, and Greg starts hanging out with her. And he openly says to the reader that he's only doing it out of obligation, and that if his mother wasn't forcing him to be her friend, he wouldn't. He doesn't have a crush on the girl, doesn't even seem to particularly like her. He just goes to try and make her laugh when he visits her. The most disappointing thing about this book is that the plot has the potential for some really good scenes and moments, but there weren't all that many. The story felt aimless at times, and I just kept feeling that this could have been done so much better. It flips the trope of the typical YA sickness love story, like in The Fault in Our Stars, but doesn't really pay off much in the end. As for the good parts, there were a few funny jokes here and some good scenes here and there, but overall, my enjoyment came from Earl and Rachel. They were really well done, and for me, they were the bright spots of this book. Also, I did kind of love the fact that Greg's cat was named Cat Stevens. That was good. Now let's talk characters. I've already spoken a little bit about Greg and how much I strongly disliked him, but I just want to echo one point that another YouTube channel, Beyond the Trailer, said when reviewing the movie, and that's that Greg is basically the anti-Ferris Bueller, and I think that is a perfect representation of his character. Whereas Ferris Bueller is outgoing and kind of trying to connect with everyone, Greg wants the exact opposite. And not to rip on him too much, but one thing that he did that really bothered me was that he kept saying, "I don't know why you're still reading this book." And I was like, dude, once is enough, twice is pushing it, but he just keeps going throughout the book, and that is just one thing that I really, really disliked about it. Earl was a much more interesting character. He comes from a broken household, and he has a really difficult life. Every scene he was in felt immediately more engaging, although I do also feel there were some aspects of his characterization that probably wouldn't fly nowadays. As for Rachel, I really enjoyed her character. I wish there was a bit more of her. I feel like she was very underutilized in the book itself. Now, as for pacing, this is one thing I have to give the book credit for. It moves fast. No complaints here. So overall, the book was okay. There were some good aspects, but also a few not so good aspects. And it's for that reason that I'm going to give this book a ranking of 2.5 out of 5 stars. So that's my review of Me and Earl and the Dying Girl. If you like this review, you could subscribe, consider giving me a thumbs up, and I'll be back next week with another video. Until then, bye.